Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso, has already become a symbol of defiance against Western dominance and a voice for African sovereignty. But what makes his story stand out even more is not only his political courage or his military determination, but the unique and groundbreaking initiatives he has been championing inside his own country. Among the most surprising of these is a project so unusual, so deeply tied to both innovation and cultural pride, that it has stunned observers both inside Africa and around the world. Ibrahim Traoré is making wooden cars and giving them to ordinary people in Africa, a symbolic and practical act that is being described as both revolutionary and profoundly inspiring. When news first emerged that Traoré was supporting local engineers, artisans, and innovators to develop wooden cars, many outside observers dismissed the idea as little more than a novelty. How could a car made primarily from wood be taken seriously in an era dominated by advanced electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and aerospace-grade engineering? Yet, in the context of Burkina Faso and the broader African continent, this initiative represents something far deeper than just building alternative vehicles. It is a statement of sovereignty, an investment in local creativity, and a symbol of Africa's ability to rise through its own ingenuity rather than relying solely on imported technologies from the West or Asia. To understand why this wooden car project matters, one has to first consider the socio-economic context of Burkina Faso. The nation is one of the poorest in the world by conventional GDP measures. Most households cannot afford imported cars, and the country remains heavily dependent on foreign imports for transportation, energy, and machinery. These imports not only drain foreign reserves, but also reinforce a structural dependence that makes it almost impossible for nations like Burkina Faso to determine their own economic future. Traoré has repeatedly spoken about the dangers of this dependency, emphasizing that Africa must learn to design, produce, and innovate on its own soil. The wooden car project, in this light, is not a gimmick. It is a proof of concept that African ideas, no matter how unorthodox, can serve African needs. The cars themselves are the result of years of quiet experimentation by young Burkinabe innovators who lack the resources, support, and recognition to expand their craft. Traoré's government stepped in, providing both state backing and visibility, turning what was once seen as a hobbyist pursuit into a matter of national pride. The cars are designed from durable local hardwoods treated to withstand weather conditions, reinforced with metal for critical load-bearing areas, and powered by simple, efficient engines. Though they cannot yet match the performance of traditional automobiles, they are cost-effective, sustainable, and, most importantly, accessible to ordinary families who could never dream of purchasing a Western-made car. When Traoré announced that these cars would be distributed to ordinary people at little or no cost, the symbolic weight of the movie became clear. Here was a president who was not merely talking about independence in lofty speeches, but was taking concrete steps to give his people tools for mobility, freedom, and pride. For families who had previously relied on bicycles, donkey carts, or overcrowded buses, the prospect of owning even a modest wooden car was transformative. It represented dignity, progress, and a sense that Burkina Faso was charting its own course. The global reaction was telling. Western media outlets at first reacted with bemusement, portraying the wooden cars as an oddity. But as images and videos of these vehicles began circulating on social media, they drew fascination, admiration, and even envy. African commentators highlighted the cultural symbolism of using wood, a material deeply tied to African heritage, in crafting something so central to modern life. Environmental activists pointed out that such cars, if refined and scaled, could offer a more sustainable and locally sourced alternative to industrial car production, which has been heavily criticized for its reliance on rare earths, metals, and fossil fuels. Economic analysts began to note that while wooden cars might not replace imported vehicles overnight, The very fact that they existed was proof that African innovation could defy expectations and create an entirely new industry niche. For Traore, the wooden car project fits neatly into his larger political vision. Since coming to power, he has consistently stressed that African leaders must stop waiting for handouts from the West and instead build their nations with what they already have. Whether in agriculture, energy, or manufacturing, his message is clear. Africa must rely on Africa. The wooden cars symbolize that ethos, showing that innovation does not always have to imitate Western models, but can emerge from local creativity and available resources. They embody a philosophy of self-reliance that is resonating not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa, where many populations are weary of foreign exploitation and endless promises of development aid that never delivers. The impact within Burkina Faso itself has been profound. Young engineers, carpenters, and artisans suddenly find themselves at the center of a national project. Workshops that once operated in obscurity are now seen as hubs of innovation. Traoré's administration has encouraged schools and technical institutes to integrate practical design and local engineering projects into their curriculum, using the Wooden Car Initiative as an example of how education can translate directly into national progress. Students no longer see innovation as something that must come from Europe, China, or America. They see it as something that can emerge from Ouagadougou, Bobo-Dioulasso, or any rural town where creativity meets necessity. At the same time, the symbolism of giving these cars away, rather than selling them at high prices, sends a strong political message. Traoré is signaling that his government is not beholden to profit motives or foreign corporations, but is committed to serving the people directly. In an era where African citizens have grown deeply cynical about leaders who enrich themselves while leaving their people impoverished, such gestures carry immense weight. They reinforce Traoré's image as a leader of the people, someone who not only talks about sovereignty, but delivers tangible benefits. There are, of course, challenges and criticisms. Skeptics argue that wooden cars cannot compete in performance, safety, or scalability with modern industrial automobiles. Some Western critics have even mocked the project as backward-looking, implying that Africa should be aspiring to electric cars and space programs, rather than building wooden vehicles. But these critiques miss the point. The wooden car project is not meant to compete head-to-head with Tesla or Toyota. Instead, it is a cultural, political, and practical initiative that proves Africans can solve African problems in uniquely African ways. It is about sparking imagination, creating local industries, and demonstrating that innovation does not have to wait for Western approval or investment. In many ways, the wooden cars are just the beginning. Traoré has hinted at scaling the project, encouraging partnerships with local engineers to improve designs, explore hybrid models, and incorporate renewable energy sources like solar charging. Some designs are already experimenting with combining wooden structures with basic electric motors powered by locally produced solar panels. Such innovations could, if developed further, create vehicles that are not only affordable and locally produced, but also environmentally sustainable. This would put Burkina Faso at the forefront of an entirely new model of African innovation, one that is rooted in local resources, traditions, and needs. The broader African reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. Across the continent, youth movements, student groups, and innovators have praised Traoré for daring to embrace unconventional ideas. In Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, conversations have emerged about whether similar projects could be launched locally. Social media has been flooded with images of wooden cars and commentary celebrating the creativity of Africans who refuse to be limited by their circumstances. The initiative has become a symbol of continental pride, much like how homemade space programs, local tech startups, and indigenous agricultural revolutions have inspired a new generation to believe in Africa's potential. In the international sphere, the project has become a subtle yet powerful act of defiance against the global economic order. By embracing wooden cars, Traore is essentially rejecting the notion that progress must always be defined by Western standards of modernity. He is redefining what it means to be modern, asserting that Africans can chart their own path without asking for permission. This challenges not only economic models, but also cultural narratives that have long portrayed Africa as dependent, incapable, or perpetually catching up. Traore is telling the world that Africa can innovate differently, and in doing so, it can rise on its own terms. This initiative also plays into the wider battle of perception between Africa and the West. While Western leaders continue to push for control over Africa's resources, whether through gold, oil, or digital currencies, Traore is focusing on empowering ordinary Africans. Wooden cars may seem small compared to billion-dollar mining deals or international energy projects, but their symbolic value is immense. They represent a shift in priorities from serving global corporations to serving local people, from chasing Western approval to embracing African identity. As the project grows, the potential for economic transformation is also significant. A domestic industry for wooden vehicles, spare parts, and artisanal engineering could create thousands of jobs, particularly for youth who are often unemployed despite being educated. Local supply chains for wood treatment, small-scale engines, and renewable energy systems could emerge, strengthening the national economy and reducing reliance on imports. This, in turn, could encourage other African nations to experiment with their own localized industries, each tailored to their own resources and cultural strengths. The story of Ibrahim Traoré's wooden cars is not just about vehicles. It is about vision. It is about a leader who refuses to accept that Africa must always be a follower in the global race for progress. It is about reminding the world that innovation is not confined to Silicon Valley, Berlin, or Beijing. It can emerge from the streets of Ouagadougou, powered by ordinary people with extraordinary determination. By giving these cars away to his citizens, Traoré is making a profound political statement that leadership is not about extracting wealth from the people, but about empowering them with tools to build their own future. In years to come, historians may look back at the wooden car project not as an odd experiment, but as a turning point in African innovation. Just as Japan once rose from the ashes of war with unconventional approaches to industrialization, or as South Korea transformed itself with bold educational and manufacturing policies, Burkina Faso may one day be remembered for sparking an African industrial revolution rooted not in imported blueprints but in local creativity. And at the center of that story will be the image of Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain-turned-president, handing over wooden car keys to ordinary Burkinabe citizens and telling the world that Africa's rise will not be stopped.